Good morning. Thanks everyone for joining us today for actually our second installment of Virtual Book Club, all about Africa, which I'm really excited about. And today we have Laura DeLuca, who is one of the co-authors of Lost Girl Found, which is a book all about the refugee girls of Sudan. And I read this a number of years ago and was just so incredibly moved by it. I think especially because we always hear about things from the male perspective, right? We all know about the Lost Boys of Sudan. A movie was made about the Lost Boys of Sudan. And I think it's actually incredibly timely right now, especially that we start hearing from women. We start hearing more of women's stories told by women, through women. And this just really moved me a lot. And because of my friendship and love of Carla and my having been able to travel to Sudan, I thought it would be a really interesting time to hear from Laura and then for us to have this conversation. And so just quickly, for anyone who doesn't know, Laura is also a faculty member here in Boulder with me. She teaches at the University of Colorado. She runs the first-year academic experience, and she is an anthropologist. She teaches courses on refugees, Africa, social entrepreneurship, international development. She actually directs the global seminar, which takes place in Tanzania. It's a part of the study abroad program. She's done field work in Tanzania, Peace Corps work in Kenya, a Fulbright in Cameroon. So you can only imagine what the conversations she and I have are like when we go on our hikes together. And Carla, she heads up sales, marketing, and also is a tour leader for ITC Sudan. And she's been traveling, living, working in Sudan since 2000. She has a wealth of information on the history, present day, beyond. She's also lived in Australia for many years. She studied Australian Aboriginal culture and the complex ecosystems of the arid region, and like many of us, loves the desert. And she's actually authored 2 books as well. She's written 2 guidebooks, one on Australia and then one on Oman and the Emirates, Middle East between traditions and modernity. So I think that this is gonna be a really amazing time. And so with that, we're gonna hand it over to Laura. She's gonna do a reading from the book, and then we'll be back with you.
Thank you so much, Brooke. So I just wanted to start out with, before I give the reading, I'm going to give the reading from Lost Girl Found, but we're in a unique historical moment right now. And as a white woman writing about refugees of color, writing about African refugees, I just want to acknowledge that lens, and that I'm really grateful for the stories that were shared with me and the ability to give a voice to people who don't always have that platform. But I also want to just say there's a really cool book. I don't know if you can see this. Rebecca Deng, who I'm actually meeting next month, who's a lost girl herself who just published a book. She speaks Dinka language, super cool. So I'll be featuring that on my YouTube channel. And I just want to acknowledge that, you know, as 2 white women writing about Black women, we're always conscious of that identity issue. And worked for some time with a number of young women. So here's what I'm going to start. Because of Brooke's intro and that interest in women and women's rights, I started right inside Kakuma Refugee Camp. Just to give you a brief on that, it's in northwest Kenya, right over the border. So I will read Inside the Camp. And this is from the perspective of the protagonist, Poni. Inside the camp, the foolishness of my hopes is revealed. Did I really believe I would find paradise here? A place filled with mangoes and streams in the middle of the desert? I should have taken my lesson from the Bible. God punishes, not rewards, those who hunger for fruit. And so this is after a long journey. I do not know what I was expecting from Kakuma, but certainly not this. Not thousands upon thousands of displaced people. Not a dust bowl that passes as a camp. Kakuma is far from salvation as anyone could imagine. In fact, the minute I enter the camp, the wind hits, stirring up a dust storm, and stings my cheeks and eyes. And any of you that have been to Northwest Kenya, even if you love the desert, it can be a challenging place, particularly in the middle of the day, but also a beautiful landscape. I am sure that my eyes would be watering were it not for the fact that I'm out of everything wet, saliva, sweat, mucus, blood, anything liquid that my body might once have produced. We are given small cups of water in tiny tin cups, and I gently prod my tongue with my dirty fingers. My tongue is rutted, just like the bottoms of my feet, but I think it may mend. The first security guard I see is a Kenyan man. He tells me his name is Kamau and points to his guard's uniform. I have a great deal of difficulty of talking because of my damaged tongue, but I managed to slur out my name as though I have consumed too much of Mama's homebrew. Kamau fills out some paperwork and then hands me a card. This is your identification and ration card, he explains. Don't lose this. Otherwise, there will be no food or water for you. I take the card in my hand, but where should I put it? I have only a tattered skirt with no pockets, and I'm wearing only half a blouse. So I'm going to go forward a little bit. I want to share a section that has to do with the UN and their decision to place lost girls with foster families, which was thought to be a decision to be culturally sensitive. However, what ended up happening is it meant that the families who they were placed with, who were also traumatized, had an incentive to get the girls married for bride price and earn money from that. So I'll just skip forward to where she's introduced by the guard. This one here, he points to me. She is Poni. She will now be your foster daughter. The woman and I eye each other suspiciously for a few moments. Larijo does not say anything, just nods in my direction. I understand that I am to go with her. She walks stiffly. Mama always had a sway to her walk. Unlike Mama, I can tell that this Larijo, her stepmother, even on her best days, never laughed so hard that she had to press her fingers into the corner of her eyes. I cannot make sense of all this. One day I was living in the village with my family, and now I long for my mother with the deepest of aches. I would give anything, even go through another round of malaria, just to have her here with me again, just to watch her cut up onions, hear her laugh. And so it continues, and we hear more about that experience of being with this foster mother and what that's like for Poni, the protagonist. And this actually, Lost Girl Found is a fictional ethnography, which means we interviewed hundreds of young women, but ended up using composites. So none of them, everyone's identity is a composite. Okay, so the last section I want to read is just a little bit more about Kakuma. The ground here is as cracked and gray as an elephant's skin. Time barely moves. I am always waiting. I wait for rations, wait for the guards to split open the big white bags of donated grains. Yet I am secretly waiting for something more miraculous, for the skies to split open and rain meat and bread down upon us, as happens in the Bible. And I beg you, Lord, if it is not too much trouble, might I request some greens to go along with the meat and bread? Greens like we used to grow back home, chards, kales, collards, and sukuma wiki, which is a Swahili word for push the weak. In this land of nothingness, there are no trees to sit under, and only the shade is that which our shadows provide. There's much more, but I want to keep the reading short so we have lots and lots of time for discussion. So thank you for this opportunity to just give you a little bit of insight into Poni and her personality and the challenges she faces that we also see women still continuing to face in our current world. Thank you so much, Brooke. I'll turn it over to Carla just to add the reason again that there were so few women resettled compared to men is again because they were with these foster families. The men lived together as unaccompanied minors. So when the State Department came to the camp, they saw all these men together and thought, they are really deserving. They're so smart, they're so motivated, but they didn't see the women in the same way. So thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to Brooke so she can introduce Carla.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. You know, it's amazing, even though I've read the book, you and I have conversations, we had a conversation yesterday, still every time you read, we speak, like I come up with more questions. So I was taking notes as you were going along, and I know that other people are probably gonna have questions too. I don't know, before I do start getting into questions, Carla, do you have something just that you would wanna say or offer based upon the things that Laura has said already?
Sure. First of all, hi everyone. And Laura, I didn't have the chance yet to tell you how much I loved your book.
Thank you.
I ordered it because I didn't read it before. I read other books on similar stories, of course, The Lost Boys of Sudan. And you know what your book brought to my mind? Another marvelous book I read on Darfur. And yeah, and I found a lot of similar things happen, and unfortunately still happens today in Darfur. The Sudanese people, either they are northern or southerns, they are Sudanese. I've been briefly to South Sudan because normally I'm based in Khartoum, which is now a separate country. No? But I went to Juba, the capital of South Sudan, back in 2011, just like a couple of months after, month and a half after the independence. Because before it was very difficult, you know, if you lived in the north to go to the south, there was, you know, war. And so after the independence, I felt safe and I went, and I was astonished to see the Southerns, the Sudanese from Juba, having huge signs saying, finally free from the north. But then when I spoke to them, they were exactly like the Northerns. They had the massive heart, welcoming people. I needed their help because I was organizing a trip and nothing was organized. So when I got there, I had to do everything very fast. So I spoke to some, I said, can you help me, please? And they all did their very best to help me. And the trip was successful. And so I tried to speak to them and say, I mean, I understand you are against the government, and I fully understand. You know, the war was horrible. And you, Laura, you described the drama in each individual story in that book. But it's a problem of the government because the people are exactly the same. You know, during the celebration for the independence of South Sudan, which was 9th of July, 2011, I was watching it live on CNN, which was broadcasting it live. And I was on the phone with my colleague in Khartoum because it was July, so I was back in Italy. I wasn't in Sudan. And for my colleague in the north, that was the saddest day of their life because they were losing their brothers. They were losing part of themselves. And so when a month and a half later, I went to Juba, and to see finally free from the north, but the people are the same. Anyway, your book was really inspirational. It brought back to me all the dramas that not just Sudan, but unfortunately many countries in Africa still live today, and all the goods and bads related to big NGOs and UN. And when, I mean, I know a lot of UN staff in Khartoum, right? They come and book trips with us, and they're lovely people, and so professional. But their job is so hard. It's so hard. And they live in an environment that is not where the normal people live in. I mean, the part when she describes the air conditioning in that office. Little Poni. She never heard air conditioning. She didn't know. So it's just very cold. It's nice in here. Really, you get really details that are very important to understand how even white people live in Africa and how other people live in Africa.
Thank you so much. I mean, I had the pleasure to visit Kakuma, but also one of my dear friends. As a woman, I always acknowledge like the people that helped me along the way. And Jim Schechter, who's now at Cornell, he spent a year doing field research in Kakuma. And then I also just want to acknowledge my co-author, and it's kind of interesting. She's the daughter of a CU professor and an incredible writer from a family of writers, but she's never been to the continent. She needs to come to Sudan with you. But so I was her eyes and ears on the ground, and I had the chance to go to Rumbek in 2005, staying in like an aid camp, which we were part of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. So there were UN workers from Khartoum, there were academics. And I think it's funny how it can, I love what you said about the North and South. At the time it was Sudan when it was united before 2011. There are a lot of friendships. There's a lot of cultural connections that sometimes get missed. And the war has unfortunately continued. There's a lot of political dimensions. There's resource, oil, Nuer Dinka conflicts. So it wasn't just the North-South. And many of the refugees I worked with for years and years, it took us 7 years to write this book because we were both mothers, we were both working full-time, and we would write it going off to like Estes Park for the weekend and just write, take a writing retreat and write straight through the day. But the people we spent time with, mostly in the Boulder, Denver area, Dinka, Nuer, Didinga, different groups, many of the South Sudanese had very close friends who were North Sudanese.
Exactly.
There was a North Sudanese teacher at my son's Montessori school who was close to all of the lost girls and wanted to work with them. So it's never as simple as it's portrayed on the ground. I just want to mention one thing that you reminded me of. During the Ebola outbreak, one of the Ebola nurses who's working in East Africa came back to the US, kind of a little bit of a flashback for us right now, and she was quarantined. They wouldn't let her go to her home before being quarantined for 2 weeks. And she read this book, and she was an aid worker herself. We didn't even know her. I forget her name now, but if you look up Ebola nurse on Google, but I ended up looking her up, and she said, thank you, because I read this book during my quarantine, and she told the New York Times it was her favorite book of the year. So I was at a New Year's party and somebody said, your book has been named in the New York Times. I'm like, are you kidding? I don't know how that happened. So I appreciate that you mentioned the aid worker piece, and the Ebola nurse who read it kind of felt some of that authenticity. And for me, that was part of being an anthropologist on the ground, working with aid workers, even living with them in Rumbek. One of the things they told us as an American, not as Italians, they were more laid back, but carry your passport with you at every single moment. You may need to evacuate and jump onto a plane. So things have calmed down a lot now. I'd love to hear more about travel in the North. I'm interested in going. I want to sign up for one of your tours.
You're welcome any day. Well, the North, and really I had the same feeling in Juba. Okay, I didn't feel unsafe. Of course, I was cautious in Juba because it was my first time, and you hear a lot of stories, and yeah, but I was moving freely with some South Sudanese that escorted me everywhere. Laura, at the time, they didn't know the euro. My biggest problem I had is that I had euro cash with me, of course, no credit cards, yeah. And all they wanted is dollars. So I ended up exchanging the euros I had at the same amount as the dollars. And only like one money change understood that it was actually a valid currency. So interesting, huh? And so really about safety, but my experience in Juba is very limited. So it doesn't, maybe you have more experience and you know more people, but in the North, I do things that I would not do here in Northern Italy, where I am at the moment. In Khartoum, I do transfers at night. I meet and greet the groups, especially the special groups, and all the flights tend to land during the early hours of the morning, literally 1 a.m. And I take taxis, I wait at the airport, and I feel absolutely safe. And I have to say that the criminality is very limited in North Sudan. It's increasing a little bit now, and this is due to the conflicts. Whenever there are large numbers of refugees, before was from South Sudan, and then from Darfur. You know, when they get to Khartoum, they don't have anything, the very basic needs. For example, now in Khartoum, there is a large number of refugees from Syria. And it's simple, they have nothing. They don't steal, but if they find something, maybe they take it. But you have probably less chance to be robbed inside your house in Sudan than what you have, you know, in most Europe, or I think the States, definitely South Africa, you know. As a woman in a Muslim country, I don't need to cover my hair, for example. Yes, all is enough, just a short sleeve and trousers below your knee, and you are fine, because they understand you are not Muslim. And Brooke, we didn't have time to discuss this, but big changes are happening in North Sudan, really important changes. Last year we had the big revolution, and you know who led this revolution? Was actually the women. The men went behind the women. So the girls, the mamas, were the one in front of the mass of people, making this very funny sound that only African can do, you know, sort of like this. And that actually is the sound of starting the revolution. That gave strength to all the men to go in the street and never return to their home until they achieved what they wanted, which is to overthrow the former dictator, Omar al-Bashir, who was the one that did the war to South Sudan, as a matter of fact, and brought Sharia. No, Sharia was already in from the previous one, but really it was 30 years of dictatorship. Thanks to the women, the revolution started. There is a temporary government, which is a mix of militaries and civilian. And in the last month, amazing things happened. For example, it is officially forbidden now, the female genital mutilation. That's a big thing. Second big step is apostasy. Do you understand? Which means eventually you can change your religion.
Can you say that again, the word?
Apostasy.
Okay.
Basically, if you're daughter of a Muslim, you cannot change your religion throughout your life. And there is actually a death sentence if you do so. And a couple of years ago, there was an American Sudanese born American, married a Sudanese born, brought her to the States. He was Christian, because Sudan even historically had Christianity until the 16th century and so on. So when they returned to Sudan to visit their family, because this girl, Mariam, changed her name, and because she married and she converted to Christianity, to a Sudanese husband, but according to the Sudanese law, she had to be put in jail, and she was sentenced to death. Of course, that didn't happen, because sometimes only the bad news makes it the headline, but then what's behind that normally doesn't find space in a newspaper. So eventually she was let go, and they came to Italy because they wanted to see the Pope. Okay, so she wasn't sentenced to death, but according to the Sharia law, she could have been sentenced to death. Well, this is no longer happening. You can, for marriage or for whatever in life, change your religion, and you will not be sentenced to death. Of course, then you have to face it with God, but that's what the Imam would say, but you don't get sentenced to death. And I think this is a very important changes, yeah?
It is nice to see. Oh, sorry, no, please continue.
No, it's okay. Well, there is also another important news for me, because I spent 6 months of the year there, is that if you're not Muslim, you can take alcohol in the country. I know this is less important, but why not? Maybe in the future, Brooke, we can actually offer some wine to our guests when they come to visit the country.
Those are all very big changes, for sure, since I was there and since we've last spoken. And it's really incredible to see progress and change, especially being led by women in a way where it improves the overall livelihood of women. So, I mean, I love it. I don't even need to ask questions. The conversation between the two of you is just exactly what I thought was.
Actually, I have another big news that I find out only today, because I read it on the news that, you know, this prime minister is working in a Sudanese way, which means shwe shwe, slowly, slowly. You can't change everything overnight. Already, of course, you have the supporters of the previous regime or the very religious people that take these changes, you know, with skepticism and worry that everything will change. But in the last week, he's been appointing 2 new state governors from actually the 2 states that there are the ruins, the archaeological ruins that we visit, which is the River Nile state in the north and the northern state. And there are 2 women. 2 women, the first time that 2 women are state governors. So, of course, there's been some protests in major cities outside Sudan, in these 2 states, but it's the minority. The minority, because when these 2 ladies actually reached the capital city of their state, which is Atbara and Dongola, there were hundreds, if not thousands of people welcoming them, clapping their hands. So what's happening now in Sudan is that, of course, there are supporters of the previous regime, which was very corrupted. And so the corrupted people will always support the corruption, okay? But the majority of the people want the changes. And you know what, Brooke? Sudan has an average age of population, which is 19 years old, a very young population. And the young, together with the girls, they made the revolution. So they will support the new government and the new changes.
So I love that. And I, again, not just hearing that it's led by women, but again, speaking about the youth, because so much change that we are seeing in the world now is being led more by youth culture. And that's actually a question that I had for you, Laura, about the book. The conversations that we're having today, the conversations that we all tend to have in general, they're very adult. They're very intense. They're very heartbreaking sometimes. And you chose to write this book, I think, for a younger audience, and it's won a lot of awards and accolades for youth literature. And I was wondering a little bit about why you decided to kind of tackle such an intense subject for a younger audience. And you're still on mute.
I turned it off while Carla was speaking, so thank you. That's such an interesting question. I just want to add an echo to what Carla was saying, that the average age is 19. 70% of the population on the continent in it is younger than 30. So it's a very youthful continent. We know it's very diverse, more than 50 countries. So you mentioned I've worked in Kenya, Cameroon, South Africa, almost across the board. Demographically, Africa is very young. I am going to answer your question. It's going to be a little indirect. I mean, in some ways we were giving voice to these young women, but there's always that personal piece of both the author and I were struggling with our own voices as women in our own society. It's easy to talk about other societies being oppressed, but trying to be a mother, a teacher, and just balance our lives, which felt very unsustainable. I won't speak for Leah, but my life felt very overwhelming and unsustainable at that point. And so it was a very emotional connection. I'll be completely honest. We had written this not for a youth audience originally. We shifted that. Leah works in a middle school in Denver, the international, I'm not giving them publicity because I can't even remember their name, but it's like the Denver International School. They speak French, Chinese, Mandarin, French, or Spanish starting from age 5 when they enter the school. And she teaches middle school English. So she started to click and think, wow, maybe this is our audience. So it was partly a marketing decision. It wasn't just from the material, but the material did fit. The other piece is she comes from a very media savvy family. My co-author's been on Oprah. Her mother's a therapist in Boulder and has written books about women and girls, women and their mothers, mothers and sons. And so Leah was actually on Oprah when she was age 14. Every single person in her family is an author. She's from this kind of New York intellectual family that moved to Boulder after her dad finished Columbia. And so she had connections at Penguin in New York. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Anyway, they're getting a book published these days. There's so much digital material out there that you have to already have a platform. And a youth platform is a really important one right now, because reaching the hearts of youth is really where you're going to make the change. But it's also a book that's ended up on middle school and high school reading lists. Just one funny thing, you mentioned the material is really heavy. A lot of my close friends' daughters were turning 13 or 14 at the time that the book came out. And some of them pre-read it, those organized mothers that I don't even know, I never did that. But what I can remember specifically, my one friend Jackie pre-read it, and she said, I don't think this material is appropriate for my daughter because there are really heavy issues. You got a sense of that from the reading, sexual harassment, even rape in the camp. And so it really is a youth. We won the Colorado Book Award. We were very honored to win that for the young audience. But it's kind of on the edge. I really think it probably is like more appropriate for 15 and above. 13 and 14 is a little bit young to deal with some of this material. However, other people would say, these are the reality of issues for women and girls, and the earlier you learn about it, they're already experiencing some of those issues even at 13, and they're more mature than we may give them credit for. So great question.
Yeah, it's so true, because I'm having those same conversations with my friends who have children, specifically about how do I educate my children on racism, right? I mean, that's such a hot topic in the US right now. And so many people are reading books about how do I educate myself as a white woman, as an adult, as a part of society on racism and something I might not know about. But what everyone is saying to me is, it's a harder question to have about how do I do this with my children. So I really did appreciate that this is something that we can share with a younger audience. I'm also curious, and I'm sure, other people, please feel free to ask questions if you have them. But I always wonder, do you still have contact with many of the refugees that you interviewed in putting together the book? Have you maintained those relationships? How are people doing? Because that's kind of always the question is now, what are the success stories, or where are they?
Right. Well, my first work was really with lost boys, and I was coming back from fieldwork in Tanzania, and everybody talks about that reverse culture shock. I was in Boulder, Colorado. It was early 2000, and I'm kind of going, it's not the stereotypical going to grocery stores. I'd been probably back and forth to Kenya 20 times at that point, but it was just this moment of, I saw a poster about 12 young men coming to Boulder, mostly Dinka speaking South Sudanese men, a couple other newer, couple Didinga guys. But anyway, I thought, here I think I am struggling adapting to Boulder, and these young men have moved to Denver, and then Boulder, which is a homogenous and progressive society that is struggling with discussions about race and privilege. So it was just really interesting. I immediately attended that event and got to meet some of the young men, and I got very close to the two young men who were the very first young men to attend CU-Boulder. And the only reason the Refugee Resettlement Agency in Denver let them come to Boulder is because one of the professors, I'll actually put in a plug, it was my co-author's father, said, I've never seen anyone so hungry for education, so motivated. When they went on their 1,000-mile journey, in addition to the Bible, one of the young men carried Things Fall Apart, and it literally fell apart, Chinua Achebe's book, because the book was that important to him. And so I got to know those first two men really well. And then I got to know some of the women. So I've kept in touch. This is part of being an anthropologist changes your life. You never see things in the same way again. I literally have thousands of contacts. I don't want to say thousands, let's just say hundreds across the world. I've followed people's migration patterns. Lived in Boulder, too expensive here, let's move to Australia, Canada. Sometimes there's a little bit of the grass is greener. Like once you're a mover, it's like you talk to your, there's a big South Sudanese, you're nodding your head. In Australia, are our benefits, are we welcoming to people? Obviously there are current political issues of migration. Who's the most welcoming? And I also think it's really important to note that migrants bring creativity, entrepreneurial mindset, education. Very often, the young women and men that I met were some of the best and brightest to make it through the journeys that they made it through, to be able to navigate those interviews, and they're really productive in their own society. It's not to say that they don't experience PTSD or other challenges, but many will say, okay, well, the benefits are better in Canada, let's go there. I could name hundreds of people I keep in touch with. WhatsApp in the morning for me from about like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., which is late afternoon, early evening in Africa and Europe, is like a very active time for me. And then now I teach a course on the anthropology of war and refugees. So it started out with Sudan and the women and the men, but now I've kind of expanded to understand more about Yemen and Syria and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iraq, so Vietnam. It's really been a blessing and a gift. I'll just name one person I got to know really well, and I'm going to keep her name confidential just because she's a very shy and I don't, without her permission, but I got to meet one of the women in 2008. I remember the day exactly because Michelle Obama was coming to Fair and Field in Boulder, and I was dying to see her speak, but I turned down my ticket because this young woman was arriving from Nairobi. And so I got to meet her the moment she got off the plane, and we've been close ever since. She's not necessarily a character specifically in the book, but I still see her joys and her triumphs and her struggles. She's very bright. She's done a lot of education here. She studied to become a pastry chef, community college, but in the end has been segmented into like work that isn't quite as professional. Like it's been a hard journey for her to get to her desired profession. She has struggled, but she's also succeeded. And I think for me, one of the big themes of this book, this is got my name on it, and also with Deng's book, is not just the sadness, but that resilience. And I think that speaks to this particular moment, the incredible challenges that people face, but it's really inspiring to follow those trajectories, even if some of them are sad, to even survive through what they've been through. And then the transition to a completely different culture is really, really inspiring, with usually a sense of hope, optimism, and deep religious faith is another piece that really is a strong theme. That was a long answer. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I want to add something, because you see, religious is very, very important because they keep them going. Yes. Okay, so it doesn't really matter if it's Christianity, Islam, because I see this in my colleagues, I mean, that are mainly Muslim, but really it keeps them going through struggle. And when you're talking about migration, that's still happening, okay? Like I was thinking, half of my colleagues in the office are actually from Darfur. They had to leave Darfur because they had no opportunities there, because they wanted to go to university. So maybe they started in Niala, but when the the problem started, so they moved to Khartoum and they completed the university. And as a migrant, and I was a migrant myself, because I lived 6 years in Australia and I had to make it there and stay there despite the visa and all that. But you really try yourself even harder, because you have to prove that you can do a job. And I have to say, I've got fantastic colleagues that really make it further than even Khartoum. We lost incredible office staff. And they moved to Dubai or Bahrain, because of course the wage, or even Saudi Arabia, the wages are better than in Sudan. So, but I'm proud because they moved from nearly as a refugee or escaping from war, came to Khartoum, find a good job, complete the university, find a good job, learn the language, learn the second language, and then they could make it further. And I'm so happy to write, good things for them so that they can improve themselves even more.
Yes.
It's encouraging, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But religion gives them this strength that, unfortunately, because I have this discussion with my friends a lot of time, it's difficult here. If you talk about how religions can make you stronger, they don't understand. I don't go to church here. I'm sorry.
Yes.
But I can see that in certain circumstances,
yes,
it becomes
yes,
a big help. Not to be confused with by the extremists. This is a totally different thing.
Yes.
But it's a problem I face even with my close friends here. They don't go out of small town, so they do not see this reality. And when you were talking about refugee, I'm in Italy. We see the boats. I see the boats on television coming in every single day. Recently, some Sudanese were brought back to Libya, and then they were shot by the Libyan government. Libya is not a safe port anymore, unfortunately. So it's a big thing, and there's a big speech. But I feel really sad when things do not work out. And I'm struggling to let the people understand what brings these people to Europe.
Yes.
Get my point.
I want to add
their
something.
life.
Oh,
sorry.
I wanted to add something about religion, because I'm culturally Catholic, and I kind of moved away from the church. But one of the young women who ended up becoming a nun inspired me so much that I went back to the Catholic Church. I ended up switching to Episcopal because of my kind of gay rights lens, but it was just a really powerful moment to kind of look at my own religious tradition with less ethnocentrism and more kind of cultural relativism, and really see the beautiful aspects of Catholic rituals. And so I started, she inspired me to go back to church. And you asked if I keep in touch with people. This same woman, this is kind of crazy, but I got to meet her mother almost a year ago in Bidi Bidi, which is a refugee settlement in Northwest Uganda. I've talked to Brooke a lot about on a really inspiring project with a young woman, Essie Nakajigo. It was the LIFT mission, but I was there for a completely separate reason. But the primary group of refugees in that camp, some are from DRC, some are from Rwanda, but the primary group is really from South Sudan, one of the largest refugee producing regions. And so I ended up meeting the mother of one of the young women who came to Boulder in the camp. And it was just this amazing kind of experience. I stopped at a little duka, a little like wooden store where they sold some tomatoes and greens and batteries, and said, like, I'm looking for this woman. And you mean, oh, the tall, New Air woman, she lives right there. And so it was just this crazy experience. However many years later, 2019, like 12 years after her daughter arrived in Boulder, I got to meet her mother in Uganda. So kind of those powerful, now kind of multi-generational as you continue with this work. So thank you for that opportunity. Great question. Is there more?
Yay.
I can do this all day. Actually, I did have a question that I'll start off with you, Carla, and then, Laura, of course, please add your opinion. I'm hearing words that have kind of formulated this question between resilience and Rwanda, and we talk about, the genocide, and we talk about the North being free from the South and the South being free from the North. So I myself have not been to Rwanda, but everything that I hear from people about Rwanda is that the Genocide Museum, for instance, and how as a country and as a people, they've come together to really move past the issues of the past. So since I do always look at Sudan through a lens of tourism as well, do you on the ground hear thoughts? Do you think it would be an important thing? Do you think it would ever happen that something similar as kind of like the reconciliation of what happened in Sudan, South Sudan, Darfur, if if something would be created ever to tell the story, or is it the fact that we're still kind of in it that we're not ready for it yet?
At this point, I don't think the countries are ready. Laura, I've heard stories last winter that they were discussing about bringing the two Sudans back together. Now, let it settle, but I think that may be a possibility. Darfur is still part of Sudan. Is not. It was an independent sultanate during the British colonies, put together. They were independent before, so that makes things a little bit difficult, culturally speaking. But then it was instrumentalized, if I can use this word, again, in favor of some races against some other race because of the shortage of water. And most of the conflict in Africa start for a very simple reason: the water. Then you see the trade behind it, okay? But the origin was actually water. So if this government can continue, and the election that will be held in about 2.5 years in Sudan keeps following this path of democracy, with the help that's been promised by all the international community and the major national society like the UN and so on, Sudan could reconcile itself. But it's very, very infant stage at this point, because there are still too many old school people still there. It can happen, and I will bring it up to the Ministry of Tourism, as I do every time I see them. Rwanda has to be our goal, you know. That's the country we have to look at. But you know, because we don't border Rwanda, we border Egypt. They look at Egypt. No, we need to look at Rwanda, because Rwanda, from an horrible situation, came out in the most spectacular way, not just because of the peace, but also a 360-degree view, including the ecosystem, banning the plastic bags. And so this is the real country we should be looking at. Thank you for bringing it up. I will write to the Ministry of Tourism again, because it's a while I don't remind it.
Grazie mille, asante sana. Wow. I just want to add to that, Rwanda is an amazing example of success. We started with the lens of women and girls. 60% of the members of parliament are women in Rwanda, post-genocide. I had the opportunity to visit Rwanda before the genocide and trek with the guerrillas. It was an incredible experience. Diane Fossey, the movie, had just come out, Gorillas in the Mist, and I got to trek. This was kind of early on in guerrilla tourism. It was in the 80s, late 80s. And so I was with the same crew that led Diane Fossey's filmmakers, and they actually had Diane Fossey Gorilla in the Mist hats. So I got to see it pre-genocide. It's just really interesting. Not only are they women and girls leaders, they're also, just recently on NPR, they have a lower rate of COVID-19 than the state of Ohio. They're approximately the same population and size as the state of Ohio in the United States. And because of their pool testing and their effective leadership, which can also lean a little bit towards the, autocratic, like get things done, tell people what to do, they're doing 20 people testing at one time, and they have a much lower rate than Ohio. So we're looking to Rwanda as a global health leader. The US could learn some lessons from them. I wrote a peacebuilding book when I was in South Africa that looked at the Gachacha courts, which are kind of a indigenous mechanism for peacebuilding, kind of telling stories. So you were saying that Sudan might not be ready for that. Brooke mentioned the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, was another lens that we looked through, and actually using the Ubuntu concept from South Africa as like, try to understand indigenous mechanisms, and the gacaca courts were super effective. You know, there is a piece of not punishment, but hearing people's stories. So, you know, it can be controversial, but I think Rwanda across the board, tourism, it's a really exciting example. In fact, one of the former South Sudanese so-called lost boys, now found men, worked strongly in the tourism sector. Now he's back in Denver, in Kigali, and it's just a really, I think, a really exciting, really, some people say that, oh, what was the name in the Marvel superhero movie, Wakanda is modeled, some people were saying Wakanda, Rwanda, it may be modeled after Rwanda, but Rwanda is a great success. Certainly not perfect, we never want to simplify, but in terms of women and girls, in terms of health, in terms of moving beyond a conflict and telling the story. And even locally, a close Rwandan colleague of mine was recorded by a documentary filmmaker during the 20-year anniversary. And Brooke, just locally at the University of Denver, in their law library, they've had a long-standing kind of memorial to what happened in Rwanda, but also moving forward. So lots of exciting things on that front.
Yeah,
Anything
Laura
else?
is incredibly lucky. I think too. I hate the word luck, but Laura and I definitely have a lot that is brought right to our doorsteps here in Boulder, Colorado, or I should say Denver, especially. I mean, Laura and I see each other every year at the Conference on World Affairs. It didn't take place in person this year, understandably, but I mean, she's hosted and brought in some really incredible speakers from Africa. We've done some really interesting programs as well. So, I mean, in terms of when I look at the entire US and I look at how many people kind of descend on Colorado to have these really interesting and hard conversations, yeah, I mean, I think every time I talk with her, it's kind of like, you have to go here and see this and do that, and this person's here now. And it's just, we live in a state that does have a lot of African influence and impact, which is really nice for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
We have just about 5 more minutes until the top of the hour. I like to try and keep these at least, you know, just to an hour. So as we wait to see if there are any other questions, I would just kind of open it up to yourself, Laura and Carla, if you have any kind of final thoughts or a conversation the two of you want to have together, please, you know, feel free.
I have a question. If I want to come to Sudan, because I never made it to Khartoum, I only made it to the south. Can you break it down? How do I get there? I heard a lot about pyramids.
Yes.
I've also worked with like a Nubian collection at the University of Colorado. Like, what do I need to know? How do I get there? What's the most exciting thing? And how are you opening up? Like, what's happening with that?
Great question. And then we do the same for South Sudan, because I have some ideas for South Sudan. So first of all, North Sudan, that's my home. So you just send me an email, I gave you all the information. But in general, as long as you have a passport with no Israeli visa in it, sorry, it's a Muslim country, 2 free consecutive pages, 6 months validity, I send you the invitation letter, go to Washington, get your visa. Can't do that, I give you the visa on arrival, just to be more costly, and that's it. And then you come to Khartoum, and then we do at least a week in the north to visit more pyramids than Egypt, and not a tourist in a site, temples, the Nile River, the desert, you name it, you get it. And you can stay in our hotel, that's really nice, very small, 20 rooms only, but really, really pretty. And I give you the best Sudanese guide I have, perfect English speaking. Okay, but I meet you at the airport at 1 a.m. when you arrive.
Sweet.
Yes.
Have a drink.
And so it is a drink. Maybe we'll have a drink by then.
None of my friends, they were saying that they had private stocks. Never mind. I'm not going to talk about alcohol while we're being recorded, but that's always good to know. I also struggle a little with heat. What's the coolest time of the year?
Yeah, you just come between November and February. That's the coolest month, time of the year.
That's when I'm on break. I'm coming.
Yeah. Otherwise, between October and April is still okay. It's just a little bit hotter in October, March, and April. Right. She came at the end of March, so Brooke is very brave, and it was really hot. But we made it. And really, I've been to Juba. I've been to Juba. As I said, I brought this very, very important client of mine from Belgium, and I needed to go myself to say, and I went a few days earlier. I mean, he had specific interest because definitely summer is not the best season. The two Sudan has got the same season. You have to come in the winter months. But what I saw in Juba, I mean, Juba is like a small suburb of Khartoum, really. It's a small town, right? There were no paved roads back then. There were goats and cows everywhere. And whenever the wind turns from one side to the other, I was staying in this lodge made up with container. The girls were burning incense, you know, to cover the smell of the animals, yeah, because they were all UN workers in that lodge. But it was very nice to get the beautiful white bull beer, because they produce beer in South Sudan.
Yes.
It's called the white bull. It's the local Sudanese South Sudanese beer. I saw a lot of biodiversity in the people. I saw you can really, really do a ethnographical tour in South Sudan. Now, I know Capoeira is opening up, and in Capoeira, you see a number of different tribes, including the Didinka, the Toposa, and then in Juba, you got everything. And also there is the Mundari tribes, which is, the Mundari are quite similar to the Dinka. The Dinka are very famous, but most of the images we see of these huge cattle with the big horns and the zebu, they are actually filmed in Mundari villages, because the Dinka are further north, and that's not so safe maybe to go that far. Now, something in South Sudan is possible to do, but as there are no infrastructure, it is extremely expensive. Now, I thought that Sudan was expensive, but it's nothing compared to South Sudan. Really, really, when I was there, even back then, I mean, there was no accommodation, and sharing facilities was $150 a night in Juba. So when you go outside, you need to organize camps, and there's nothing, few cars. I've been to Angola, and I think South Sudan is as expensive as Angola, really. Yeah, the poorest is the country, the less infrastructures there are in the country, the more expensive there is. But, you know, maybe not just now, but we're keeping a close eyes on South Sudan, because I loved what I saw. And if there is a possibility, I really would like to do something.
Yes, thank you. I tried to go in 2009. I was in Kenya for an international peace conference with Karambu Ringera, who's also from Colorado and runs international peace initiatives. But getting over to Juba, it was just complicated. There's actually an anthropologist, Carolyn Nordstrom at Notre Dame, who talks about moving around during war, and that you can be safe even in places that are considered unsafe if you pay attention to, you know, you have all the local contacts. If you're not necessarily immersed in that conflict, and you just listen to what local wisdom is about, like, don't go on that road, constantly changing, this suburb of Juba. So I had a ticket to Juba in 2009, but unfortunately we did listen to the local wisdom, and they were saying this where you're going isn't a great time now. But of course that was pre-independence, 2011. It's funny when you mention that in 2005 for the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, our lodgings were quite expensive because they had to build the infrastructure up. We got to visit like some Dinka ceremonies. It was still actually kind of a little bit in terms of landmine. There were some concerns with that. That was 15 years ago. But it was a Kenyan tourist company that was managing the aid camp. Our food was fabulous. Our water was fabulous. There was a little bar that I remember that was kind of like straight out of probably the book that you read, where people are drinking white bull beer, and they're...
No, that was me drinking the white bull beer in Juba. In a
NGO,
lodge. Now I tell you also the name in a minute.
There were SPLA guides that came in with their guns, you know, in their holster. So it was just like, wow. And it reminded me of the tent that you posted yourself in on Facebook recently.
That was one of Carla's camps.
I think I'll end here. We could keep on talking all day. But I don't know if you have any final words, Brooke.
Okay, actually, so I like on our hour, we have a very serious question. Is female circumcision an issue in Sudan. And I'm actually very happy to have that as a question, because, you know, we were also in our kind of pre-webinar conversations, I was asking questions about femicide as well. So yeah, is that, well, is circumcision, female circumcision, genital mutilation, goes by a number of different terms, an issue? You had mentioned that it's now outlawed.
It is now outlawed. First of all, also I would like to make a little bit of clearance. This is not related to religion. This is an African tradition, okay? So already in Khartoum and North Sudan, because unfortunately for South Sudan, schooling is much better in North Sudan. The problem that created all this, in addition to the religion, is that the money of the oil helped creating a lot of infrastructure in North Sudan, and nothing was invested in South Sudan, okay? So in Khartoum, there are actually some very good schools. And it's years now that I see talk about stop doing this to your daughter. And thanks with an increasing number of women going further with studies, this has already helped a lot, especially in the big cities where ladies can actually get an education. The problem still was quite widespread in rural communities, in the desert. And the problem is the culture. You get my point? If a girl hasn't done that, then she has difficulties in finding a husband. And if she didn't go to school, how can she get a living? Huh? Things started to change a few years ago, but finally now with the law, it is against the law. We cannot say that the Bedouin in the desert will stop doing it tomorrow. But for sure, it means that even in rural areas, the little school will have to talk about it. And the process will go on. So it was important that it became a law, because now it will be part of the lessons. As more ladies and children will go to school, kids, girls will go to school, the better we can face also this problem.
Thank you. I would like to add something also from East Africa. Oh, from Kenya and Tanzania, where I work. I was just in Kenya in February visiting a school, a boarding school outside of Narok called Mosiro Girls, run by Selina Intiankiki. She runs a project there working against female circumcision. She's a Maasai woman who's been circumcised herself. So in some ways, she's the best person as an emic or insider view. It was very painful. She was very upset. She didn't want that to happen. There's a distinction. I think the legal piece is very important for protection, but as an anthropologist, there's that distinction between legal and social. Just like we know here, something can be against the law in Italy and the US, but people can still do it. And so having that backup, but it's been illegal in Kenya, and yet it continues. And we talk about patriarchy and women and girls, but it's also sometimes the elder women who will continue that tradition, because just as you said, the issue of childbirth, the issue of even finding a partner, getting married. Some people say the circumcision reduces your sexual pleasure. That might be one reason behind it.
Most of the time is you don't have it anymore. It's gone forever.
Right. And so it was really empowering to be with this 20-something-year-old Selina Intiankiki Maasai woman who's a really powerful voice. I'll share her contact with you, Brooke. She's actually in Kenya if you want to visit her when you go next month, or go, in August. Super powerful. I took a bodo, a little local piki for like 3 hours on a bumpy road to get to this school, and my bum hurt a lot by the time I got there. One of the things that's happening during COVID is girls are having to go back to the home that they fled. They fled to leave circumcision, to leave forced, as an anthropologist, I have a problem with the term forced marriage, but to leave places where they were asked to do things that they didn't want to do. And now that's a big issue. So the need for funding, the need for support, and so many of your projects really look at empowering women and girls, and it's even more important during this pandemic because going home to areas where you fled is not ideal.
Exactly.
For people that are interested in it as well, I'll include this in the follow-up because I just can't place the name of the book, but my friend Karen Coburn, who's on the webinar, might remember it and type it out for me now. There's a great book that she recommended that we all read in December when we were in Senegal, and it is about how Senegal, how it changed and then eventually outlawed genital mutilation as well. And it gets exactly to the heart of what you were speaking about, Carla, of how it is cultural. And you, even for any of us, I mean, we are all outsiders. Even though we work in Africa and we study Africa and we love Africa, we are still outsiders. And so the story was being told of a woman who wanted to make this better, but very much understood, I have to get the buy-in of the head of the community, not just the women, but the men. And then I've got to work with them and understand how they are going to then spread that message. And if I get one community to follow, then they will go out and share it with other communities as well. So it was just a really very powerful book that the unfortunate reality is it doesn't matter what country we're speaking about, whether it's in Africa or elsewhere, it's the same concept of how we go about ending that. So I'll put that in the follow-up since I just can't think of the name now either, but it's a good success story on how working with cultures and having women do it themselves can again make real change.
Brooke, also, since you mentioned Karen Coburn, I wanted to mention Africa and the Rockies because I know Africa Travel has worked really hard to create a network in Colorado. And so it's not an accident that there's such a strong community here. Even when I travel, this is a little bit of a digression from female genital circumcision, mutilation, whatever you want to call it. When I travel in the Serengeti, when I travel anywhere on the continent, I'm always shocked at how many people from Colorado I meet. And I think there's an adventure mindset to living in the mountains, to being drawn to live in the mountains, that travel like may extend beyond. We're a pretty small population state compared to some places on the coast. So, you know, I want to acknowledge Karen Coburn for all the work that she's put into Africa and the Rockies. And those kind of networks are really, really important. They build community, they build connection, especially in times like this where many people are grounded. How do we stay connected? How do we stay informed? Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
I want to add something. I know we're over time, but we're talking about Africa, and I really need to say that we cannot underestimate African women. Despite their religion, despite whatever, the African mamas, wherever you are, they have their power. So if we look at history, in Sudan, we had the local history where the queens were called Kandake. They were ruling back from the 4th century BC to the 4th century AD. They had the same power as the men because Africanity is like this. Okay, so if we empower women in Africa, they will find their own way.
Yes, yes,
All
yes.
we need is to give them the confidence.
Yes.
And maybe create the group. There are these type of women groups now in Sudan. When you asked me this question today, I was calling these women in Sudan to talk about feminicide, you know, get their opinion. So it's my voice, but I spoke to these women associations done in Khartoum today. So we need to empower the African women, and then they can sort it out. If they could overthrow Omar al-Bashir after 30 years in Sudan, they can do it within their family and their community.
Yes, and we can learn from Africa because they've had more female presidents. The U.S. is still way behind, right? Liberia, you know, there's some great, and so we can learn a lot from African leadership, from women, as you were saying, the mamas. And I think also moving beyond this white savior complex of collaboration, partnership, which both of you talk about, to what you were saying, Carla, about like it's the women themselves on the ground in Sudan. I know working with Selena Inti and Kiki, Rahab Kanana, it's like the time has come, especially at this conference that I went to in Kenya, run by several organizations, but it was in Lemuru, it was Women in Conservation, Diverse Voices in Conservation, and this theme of kind of empowering the women themselves that are working on these issues, but in partnership. It's not to say, and Brooke and I talked about, one of the most very impactful things you can do is supporting education of girls.
Exactly.
There's nothing that is more impactful, the work you do with like uniforms, but always talking on the ground. And I love what you do in terms of monitoring, evaluation, and follow-up. It can't just be like dumping money. It has to be really mindful and a long-term relationship. Is the money actually going to the girl? Like, make sure, you know, all that transparency is in place. But thank you for bringing up that point.
Well, and I think with that, I'm going to take some of the words that I heard you both say and basically just again say it is all about community. It's about nurturing our connection with each other, having conversation, trying to bring to light all of these different issues and share it with people. And, you know, for everyone who's on with us, they know me very well. For me, it's always also about how do we then take that and try and make it positive. So I really appreciate the time that you gave us today, Laura and Carla, and everyone who has stayed with us still. I think it's just such an amazing conversation. I'm keenly aware that we have 3 women, though none of color, on our talk today. And, you know, that is something I'm always sensitive to it. I just really wanted to be able to talk about Sudan and the refugees and women, and these were the friends that I was able to bring to the conversation today. I think that women are so important, and I think that diversity are so important, and I hope that we all continue to have these conversations and to tell these stories and to support each other from the inside and from the out. So thank you very, very much again, ladies, for joining us. Thank you for everyone who was on the call with us today as well. And I'll go ahead and stop recording us now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brooke
Thank
and
you.
Carla, I have a question. I wanted to